So we are on. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the 10th episode of Bodha, the Dharmika view of everything. Today we will be discussing a man whose ideas have helped shape an entire movement. We are speaking of none other than Savarkar, his ideas and ideals, and how they shaped the movement of Hindutva, and what has been his contribution during and post independence. So I'm joined today with my colleague who is a senior researcher at Brihat, Shri Sushant Gangoli ji. Welcome, Sushant ji.
Namaste. Namaste.
Uh, since we are beginning on an auspicious note, today being the Jayanti of Sri Lokmanya Tilak, we'll start briefly on Sri Lokmanya's contributions in shaping Savarkar's ideals. So, I understand, having read through Vikramji's work and other works as well, that Lokmanya ji was a tremendous influence in shaping the entire Hindutva movement. As contemporary to Savarkar, even prior to him, he was kind of the igniting fire that lit his zeal. So, just to understand that aspect a bit more clearly, Shushanji, can you shed more light on the contribution of Sri Lokmanya Tilak in shaping Savarkar's ideals and how it he built on his ideas?
Okay. First of all, namaste to everyone and thank you, Anshuman, for this conversation. Very important day today because as he was called, Lokmanya Gangadhar Tilak was the father of Indian unrest. And later on, in a way, his shishya or his disciple was called the most dangerous man in India by the British Empire. I'm obviously talking about Swatantra Veer Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, or affectionately what we call him Tatya Rao. Lokmanya's influence, Anshuman, is very pertinent and very important because, as all of us understand, those who study history, he's part of the Garamdal or the extremists in those point in time. And he influenced not only Vinayak Damodar Savarkar or Swatantra Savarkar, but a generation of people through his works in Kesari and Maratha. Very important thing is he was the one who influenced Chafekar brothers during that point in time. I remember in history that Chafekar brothers were the one who killed Rand. This is in Pune in 1897, and
Yes.
eventually Damodar Pant Chafekar and his brother were hanged. And the person actually who inspired them to do so, there is a very important anecdotal story, a very short story, but I'll tell you that during a Ganesh Utsav festival, which was actually very interestingly started by Lokmanya Tilak in Pune, and a Sarvajanik Ganesh Utsav, as we are to
The communal
understand today.
celebration of Ganeshotsav,
Yeah,
yes.
Shiva Jayanti and everything. Chafekar brothers presented a fatka. Now, fatka in Marathi is a ballad, or what we know as a Shaurya Geet in a vernacular or a colloquial way. And in that fatka, they had called out the evil of government and the atrocities that the government was doing through a mythological analogy. And when they approached Lokmanya Tilak, Gangadhar Tilak, he said that, is it just that you're going to sing about it or going to do something about it? Because we are not a caste of eunuchs or what we call as Shand. No? We are not manless people. We are the generation of lions, and we should do something about it. That hit Damodar Chafekar so much that he went on, and with his brothers, three brothers basically, they assassinated Rand, who was the commissioner of Pune at that point in time. And this incident, very, very interesting, and see how there is an interweaving of generational courage, inspired Swatantra Veer Savarkar, because when he heard of it, he was so disturbed from inside that young people sacrificing themselves. He took a vow in front of Ashtabhuja Durga, and that is
Yes.
how this whole idea of Marita, Marita, Marain, and Zunzen, this very important sentence that you can find throughout Savarkar literature, that I will raise a armed revolution, Shasastra Kranti as he called it, and I will fight to the last drop of blood, or I will die, but I will gain independence. That is the oath to the Ashtabhuja Durga that he took. And this whole incident was then later on inspired by Chafekar brothers' sacrifice. And when we go back to the original source of that, we find Lokmanya Tilak. And Lokmanya Tilak later on inspires Swatantra Veer Savarkar through his writings in two dailies that he published, Maratha and Kesari,
Kesari,
and Savarkar was very much influenced by that. And coming to the concluding point at how these two great men were connected together, the letter to India House, Shyamji Krishna Verma, recommendation letter for the Shivaji Scholarship, which was established to bring Indian youth to England to understand the intricacies of British governance and to fight against it. The letter of recommendation of Swatantra Veer Savarkar was written by Lokmanya Tilak, calling him the future of Indian armed revolution. And as we understand, he was a Vijigishu, Lokmanya Tilak, that he created this whole generation of freedom fighters to fight the evil colonial government that was in India. That is how important his contribution is. Many people, unfortunately, don't highlight or understand these facts. But Lokmanya Tilak, I think, is the fountainhead of Indian armed and resistance movement in India.
absolutely. And this is a very excellent point that you raised about intergenerational continuity, that thread which bound all these freedom fighters. And Savarkar was part of the geography of Lokmanya Tilak, but Tilak's influence was far greater than that. It
Yeah,
bound
yeah.
entire India. Just in the case of Savarkar, and I recall reading in Shri Sanjeev Sanyalji's newer book of his revolutionaries, he actually mentions this entire thread how he calls Savarkar and Aurobindo the first generation of revolutionaries. But actually, we see it, he has been inspired and he has been enthused by the ideas of Tilak.
One more
One of the
person, if I can,
yes.
is Shivram Madhav Paranjape, or who was known as by a better name called as Kaal Karte. Now, he published something, a fortnightly journal called Kaal. You can translate that to time. You can translate that to maybe in a more darker way. Kaal in Marathi also means ki death, but it was death of the colonial empire, not anyone else's death. And Shivram Madhav Paranjape's work was so deeply absorbed by Savarkar that it leads him to eventually reading Mazzini. It leads him to eventually understanding that armed revolution is the way to shape, and also very important, the importance of Swarajya, Swatantrata, and Swadeshi. These three things, which later on are adopted and appropriated by many other people in Indian independence movement. But the origin point again of Swarajya, at least, because the man who said Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it, is none other than Lokmanya Tilak. So this idea of Swarajya or absolute independence, Swarajya, you can just break it down, was given by Lokmanya Tilak and people like Kaal Karte Paranjape. Yeah, you're saying something, Anshuman.
Yes. No, I was just speaking about this and what a corpus of influence that was on Savarkar. But just on this point, because today we see that Savarkar's legacy is being distorted. We saw in the earliest era in Congress time that Savarkar's legacy was forgotten. He was even erased almost from the black cells of Andaman where he was imprisoned.
Very true.
The government which came to power under Atal Bihari Vajpayee, they actually reinstated his plaque there. But now we are faced with another issue that his legacy or his ideas, more importantly, have been given a twist. They are being appropriated to serve another agenda, which may not be his actual original thought on those matters. So we will get into detail in that on his ideas in a short bit. But just on the point, on this point of his ideas, Sushantji, I would like to know what was Savarkar's exact idea of who is a Hindu, because in my reading of his literature, this has been his constant exhortation, the first definition of who is a Hindu.
Hmm.
We see that today many people give out the statement that a Hindu is anybody who resides in India. We are all having the same DNA, so we are all Hindus. But I don't think he actually used it that lightly. In his book Hindu Rashtra Darshan, he actually says that this is the most crucial component of definition that has to be laid out first before you can envisage a Hindu Rashtra. So, what was his idea of Hindu? Hindutva. If you can shed some light on that, Sushant.
Uh, Obviously, we will expand on this idea further as we go, because then I think Hindutva is one of his first very important documents that highlights what we understand today as political Hinduism in that sense. So he says, "A Sindhu Sindhu Paryanta Yasya Bharata Bhumika Pitrubhu Punyabhushchaiva Savai Hindurita Smrita." So everyone who regards and claims this Bharata Bhumi from Indus sees as his fatherland and holy land is a Hindu. This is a definition, what he gave. And I think Tilak also tried giving a definition, and which was again somewhat geographically influenced geographically, that Tilak understood. He wrote a book also called Arctic Home of Vedas, and we can discuss that sometime later when we're discussing Tilak. But both of them understood that this is a civilizational understanding of nationality. Many people then criticize, okay, but the definition is geographical, but it actually outlines the civilizational geography. We should understand this first, that from the Indus, the Sapta Sindhu, and later on in Hindutva you can understand that he explains why the word Hindu. So we understand this idea of a geographical understanding, and how culture, very very important. I understand that we also in Brihat work around culture, so that also is something we resonate with deeply. That is the reason this whole idea of this organization also that we are part of, that how culture binds us into a common bond of blood and also geography, and how this motherland, and you're considered not only because you're born here, because I can say, okay, I consider this as a holy land, but I don't subscribe, or I don't understand the idea of culture, so I'm not a Hindu particularly. You should both subscribe to this idea that even if you are not a Hindu, a practicing Hindu, maybe let's take an idea of a person who comes from a different faith. And let me also make this very clear: Savarkar had never any problem with people practicing different faiths. He just said that they have to understand that culturally they are Hindus. Culturally, they understand and they trace their origins and their forefathers, and what the Vedic seers or mantradashtras inspire, and created this land from nothing but pure spiritual energy, and that whole body of what we know as Pitrubhu, or fatherland, or we now know as Bharat Mata. We understand and recognize that idea, and I give my allegiance. I offer my whole being to that land. If you are that, if you consider these two things, that culturally I am atoned and I am connected to this land, I consider this as my punya bhumi also. That whatever I offer, whatever my religion is, whatever my culture is, whatever my practices are. I remember how can we understand this idea, but this analogy can be found. There is a other different example, that once Atal Bihari Vajpayee was in Indonesia, and he was talking, and they had organized a Ramayan, what you call as a manchan, or a rendition of Ramayana. Indonesia obviously is very culturally rich in terms of, they borrowed heavily from our culture, what Indian or Bharatiya culture that is. But Indonesia, as you know, is a Muslim, majoritarily Muslim state. And Atalji ends up asking that, okay, you are a Muslim state, but how can you have a rendition or a presentation of Ramayana? The answer he got was that Ram is a symbol of our culture, and we adore that culture and adore him as a symbol of a great man, and that is the reason we are so connected to him. So you can understand this example, from this example, that how do we associate ourselves with our cultural symbols, our cultural rituals, and we say that we belong to this land, akin to someone who says that, okay, I'm born in India, but I subscribe to some different culture or some different idea. Those who do that are not Hindus, geographically, culturally, civilizationally. So Hindutva is Rashtriyatva, and Rashtriyatva is Hindutva. Being nation is being part of that Hindu being, or Hindu-ness. Hinduism also. I understand Savarkar when I read him. He also had this problem with this word Hinduism, because ism then is a very Western construct. And I think you should also thoda elaborate on, in that sense, elaborate on that a bit. And this Hindutva is actually Hindu-ness, the quality of being a Hindu. And you can be an atheist for that matter and also be a Hindu at the same time, because you culturally identify yourself and you understand that civilizationally I have been a part of all the forefathers that have stayed in this land and I belong to this land. I'm born in it and I also ascribe and subscribe to the civilizational ideas of this land. That person can be a Hindu. I would rather further in our discussion elaborate on that, but this is the basic idea. Uh, you're on mute, Anshuman.
Sorry, I was just making the point that even the atheism that you speak of, Savarkar's atheism was not a entire rejection of the spirituality which this
Yeah,
land has sprouted.
yeah,
Rather,
yeah,
if you see the flag that he proposed for Hindu Mahasabha and for India as a republic when it becomes one, it had the trine symbols of a sword, which meant the protection of Hindudom, as he referred to it.
yeah,
It had
yeah.
the it had a snake which represented the
That's
Kundalini.
Kundalini. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
the Kundalini, which is the spiritual force which moves from Muladhara all the way up to Sahasrara. The
Shastra.
yogic principle, which says ki when the Kundalini reaches to Sahasrara, you attain moksha, you become free of the world's karmic cycle. So he proposed that as a flag for Hindudom. So it would be very incorrect to call him an atheist in the traditional sense that we understand it. And even on the idea of Hindus, I would just like to elaborate slightly more on the point that you touched upon. His idea of Hindus as and Bharat as Pitrubhu and Punyabhu, it was very well thought out in the sense that he laid out his arguments that when you call Bharat as Pitrubhu, you are excluding others who have a punya relation with this land. For example, he gave the Chinese, the Japanese, all of those who had been influenced by Buddha Dharma, Bodha Dharma, and who consider this land as a holy land. It may not be exclusively this land to be holy. Their own motherlands are holy to them, but this also is a holy land. And with Punya Bhu, you are excluding those who are born here, but those who don't align their loyalties to this land, such as Jews, Parsis, Muslims, and Christians, obviously. But in that sense, that definition was very well thought out. Today, we see when we say कि Hindu is everybody who is geographically in this land, and they can believe in anything, practice anything, whatever they want, because they have gained the blessing of being born in this land, and thus they are Indians. The modern nation state construct, as we see, so that has been abused, and people we see them saying, "Ki since we are now born in this land, we are Hindus by right. We can do anything, and in Hinduism, anything goes." For one example, there have been propositions to say कि cow's meat, beef, can be consumed. There are proponents for that within the side of people who call themselves Hindu conservatives, and others as well who say is a cow can be revered while alive and then sold for meat and sold for skin when it is dead. So it being a very useful animal in that sense. Savarkar, I don't feel that his and main point on this was they all cite Savarkar, saying Savarkar had this notion that cow's divinity is actually not divinity at all. It is just usefulness that turned into divinity. But we don't think so. After having rigorously gone through Savarkar's writings, a different picture comes out. Sushantji, you would like to elaborate on that? His conception of cow, how to
Yeah.
treat the cow, and how what is the divine aspect of cow? Yes.
I'm smiling because there is a different memory that I have. Uh, Also, if I can take a minute lesser than that on this idea of Hindutva that you elaborated, and I love the fact that you highlighted Buddhism also. His thoughts on Buddhism are very sharp, and if someone takes up the book Hindutva, they will understand. And he says that eventually the idea of too much of ahimsa, how it hurts and how it
Exactly.
eventually leads to detriment. And he wrote a play called Sanyasta Khadga, highlighting this fact. He wrote many plays actually, very few people know that he was a great playwright
Poet
in
and
that sense.
playwright.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That part you can just adore, and I have decided today not to go into, because my immense love for Tatya Roy, I limit myself for adoration that I want to show in that sense. But just Savarkar as a personality from literature is excellent. You can just read his works, his poems.
Absolutely.
Kamla is something. Being in Andaman, being in Kalapan, in writing such a beautiful romantic work for that matter is very important. Coming back to the point of Hindutva and Kav, I'll expand on that. Also, very important thing when he says Hindutva, he means Jain, he means Buddhists, he means Sikhs, he means Lingayat, everyone, and rather also people who come from a different faith. He said that we have so many avatars that have been there. What is the problem that we include Jesus and Muhammad also? Matlab, he is, see the expand, see the inclusivity, and now you link Savarkar with such people go ahead and call him a fascist also. Matlab, I laugh at that idea that how fascism can be linked to this. Such an inclusive person. And regarding his atheism, he was an agnostic in a very different way. He was not an atheist. So that
Exactly.
also has to be understood. Yeah, yeah. Coming to another very important person is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, and his views on cow are very revered. And he said cow is a holy animal. You should. And we had provisions in directives and principles of state policy in constitution referring to that adoration that milk and milk animals and cows should be protected. But there is a different. If you allow me, I'll do a comparative
Sure.
thing and how Gandhi and Savarkar. So, Gandhi also said that if Hindus want to dream of India and they want to have a country where they call as a country of Hindus, they are living in a dreamland. That also is what Gandhi said. Also, he said that cow is very important. This is agricultural country, but I have to let go of cow for unity of a Mohammedan and a Hindu situation. I have no control over that. I would rather let go of the cow, and I would rather protect the unity of masses. Akin to that, in Marathi there is a, and why I'll tell you why I smiled also. I remember many of my left-leaning or radical friends or on the other side, they saying, "Oh, Savarkar used to say, गाय हा उपयुक्त प्राणी आहे आणि आपण गोमांस भक्षण केलं तरी चालेल." Why am I saying this in Marathi? Because it is very important. Cannot say it in English. The impact would be lacking. That guy is a very useful animal, and you can, even if you can eat it. Savarkar also said this, na, so it's okay, but they always fail to mention, and this has been used very notoriously. As you said, Savarkar's thought and all these ideas are being appropriated by a certain gentry of people. That, and I would like to quote here, he said that I criticize the false notions involved in cow worship with the aim of removing an understanding. A worshipful attitude is necessary for protection, but it is improper to forget the duty of cow protection just for the sake of divinity. So what Swatantraveer Savarkar is trying to tell you here is that, okay, you understand there can be preferences of certain class of people towards consuming beef. It can be there. But he said that if you are harming a cow just to harm Hindu sensibilities, it should be absolutely avoided, and cow should be protected with every ounce of energy that the Hindu society should have. No one highlights this fact, and that is unfortunate. But he said that, basically, when we say that cow protection and then cow worship, if I put it simply, this is the idea
Exactly.
that if you worship the cow, you should be protecting it. And see, let me be very blunt and very truthful. You see the condition of cows, if you really want to see in India today. We revere the animal, but then we have to protect it. He said that if you just revere the animal and cows are going around the streets, sitting there and then creating filth, how do you say and claim? This is Savarkar, by the way. This is not me saying it. That how do you say that it's a revered animal? You protect it, you do all the necessary things that a state has to do, or a class of citizens
Community
has
has
to
to.
do, community has to do, rather the Hindu community has to do, and then you call, oh, this is a revered animal and we worship it. And he quotes Chhatrapati Shivaji later on, that Shivaji Maharaj actively started working against Aurangzeb, and this is by Savarkar only, when people from, I think, what you can say, the areas where Mughal eventually occupied, because there is a huge campaign by Aurangzeb coming to Deccan and everything. That's a part of history. But he said that women, children, and cows are being hurt, and that is what triggers Chhatrapati's action against Aurangzeb. And you have incidents of Sambhaji Maharaj also. Matlab, that is very much there. Yeah, so rather Shivaji Maharaj, when in Agra they stopped someone from killing a cow. So Savarkar, in so much reverence of Shivaji, because he, for one person, one icon that Savarkar idealizes beyond any part. We talked about Lokmanya, but one is Chhatrapati Shivaji himself. And who has not done much work for cow protection than Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj himself? So how can you say Savarkar subscribes to the idea or permits to the idea that cow, okay, you can kill her because then and he's an atheist and everything. That is just crass. Matlab. It is rather very uncouth, I would say, of people who profess or propagate such kind of ideas. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Anshuman.
This kind of appropriation. Sorry, am I audible? Yes.
It's very unfortunate.
This,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, this kind of appropriation of his ideas, just to label him an atheist and then proclaim that he was in the favor of cow slaughter, is
Hmm.
dishonest to say the least, and it is malicious and twisted. But
Hmm.
one point that was mentioned in between, you mentioned it. It is the duty of the community and the state to first protect the cow, preserve the bovine, and then worship it and revere it, so much so to say. But
Hmm.
we see that one component of protecting the cow is that the Hindu community must be able to, its riches must be able to be utilized for that
Yeah,
purpose. And
yeah.
I'm not just saying in the sense of cow protection. For every action that the Hindu community endeavors, and the Hindu Mahasabha was for that only. It was a congregation for Hindu Rashtra. But even otherwise, for every aspect of communal action that is sought out of the Hindu community, the temples are the instrument. They are the primary component which have been present since ages, and they are how the Hindu community exercised its will after the loss of state power. Before there were rajas, and they willed their actions, and the temple also aided in that. But after the state fell to the invaders, the temple still kept that way of life and protection of bovine alive. The temple, anyways, even today, if anybody goes out and sees, any ancient temple has a gaushala attached to it. What we have today, on the other hand, which is unfortunate, is that the state, which is proclaimed itself to be secular, is in control of temples. And even going further than that, the state, many ideas are floated today by so called intellectuals that since caste is the basis of all discrimination that exists in the world today, and caste was founded by Brahmins and Brahmin patriarchy and everything and all of that sort, so Brahmins can be sidelined in the management of temples, and a new system must be appointed, must be put in place, which will help determine who will be the priests at temple, state-sponsored priesthood, so to say. So on this, and many such people advocate Savarkar's ideal of Hindu unity to say, ki, look, he was for Hindu unity, caste is against Hindu unity, and the relation they draw out of thin air. And then they say, so since Brahman is the fount of all caste discrimination, so let's remove the Brahmins from the temples and let's put in a new system in place, which is a competitive exam come Brahmanhood, which is being proposed, new system which is being proposed for temple management. So, sorry for the slightly complex topic, but what was Savarkar's views on caste, and can his arguments be force-fitted into this narrative? Ki the caste discrimination exists, so Brahman is the culprit, so temple must be managed by the state as how it sees fit. Shushanji, your thoughts on this?
Uh, yeah, it is a very complex topic. And caste has been a very, looking at the present elections, we vote for caste and not for dharma. That is something that I have observed with my limited understanding of the democratic politics that this country is based on. Uh, there are two, three things. Now, he has actively worked for people to enter temples also during his time. I think this is 1929, where he worked ki asprusha, untouchables, they should enter temples. And there, in Ratnagiri, during the period of his uh,
Confinement there, yes.
political exile, or sthanabaddhata, as it is known in the literature, where he was not allowed to cross and go out of Ratnagiri. Ratnagiri, if I assume people might have heard of this place, it is in Konkan, the western Ghats. It's near the Konkan belt. It's a city, Ratnagiri. So in that context, when he was in Ratnagiri, he built a Patita Pavan Mandir. Okay, and Patit Pavan Mandir, and looking into the conservative threads of those times, and everyone said, ki, okay, now how can you allow untouchables? And he also tried to bring untouchables to various temples and obviously the priestly class, but opposed it. And the point here is that it was not that there was only Brahmins who opposed everything. One should understand, when one says Savarna, the idea of Savarna, the word, this has been used at many incidences, the word Savarna, basically high caste people. So it means everyone who is involved in that, and creating untouchability, or while creating caste atrocities, it is not like always Brahmins were in forefront. I would say maybe this might be a bit controversial, but everyone who was part of that high class gentry was responsible for creating these systems of social hierarchy and untouchability.
And low class
Savarkar,
as well, because he
low class,
castigated,
yeah,
uh,
decastigated,
for
and
example, Mahars as well.
they were basically, now what you understand as the Dalit discourse, but Dalit, actually the word comes very later. Now it is called Dalits, but Dalit is not a word. Matlab, Asprusha. Also, interestingly, Gandhi came up with the concept of Harijan. So Savarkar very sharply, as he himself came from a Kokanastha Brahmin family. He never subscribed to the conservative trend of Brahmins. There are certain ideas that he did not agree to. I would very clearly state that. I won't say he was absolutely. By birth, he was a Brahmin. He was a Chitpavan Brahmin. But then he asks Gandhi that if you are calling them Harijan, who are we? We are also Harijan. मतलब to put it vernacularly, हम भी हरि के ही जन हैं. अगर वो हरिजन है तो हम कौन है फिर? So this idea, right? And I would quote him, one of his very interesting letters that he writes to Narayan Rao Savarkar, Dr. Narayan Rao Savarkar, the youngest of Savarkar. There were three brothers, right? There was
Yes.
Vinayak Damodar Savarkar, who we know, Tatya Rao, then there was Baba Rao Savarkar, and there was Narayan Rao Savarkar. From Andaman, there is a series of 13 letters that he wrote to his brother, his family, and everyone. And you will understand why I'm taking this example. And Narayan Rao was in Calcutta that point in time. And during this whole idea of intercaste marriages and what we are discussing right now, you also came up with that point, right? That intercaste marriages are to be done in that sense. So because this is a letter from you should understand, from a elder brother to a younger brother. So that affinity and that jovialness is there. This is not Swatantra Veer Savarkar writing to Narayan Savarkar. This is the elder brother, Tatya Rao, writing to Narayan. Bard. It was called, affectionately was called Bard. So he says that I have not heard from you in many days, and I'm not verbatim quoting. So this is just the gist. So I should make that clear. But he says, "Have you found a Bengali bride and a sister-in-law for me?" He says it jovial, and I would be okay with that because it would bring the national integration, and Hindu unity and Hindu blood would come together. This is very important to understand the mind. It is not as we understand, people or the political ideas talk about destroying or annihilating the caste. This was not about that. We should understand the focus here. He was trying to build Hindu unity rather than destroying the caste structure. And he talks about the relevance and utility of caste structure when it is there. I'll quote something. See, he says, this is quote unquote, I'm saying that what of interdining but intermarriages between provinces and castes. Strength that binds you and makes you a main organism, whether a blood of language or common motherland, Let this ancient and noble stream of Hindu blood flow from vein to vein, from Atak to Katak, till at last Hindu people get fused and welded into an indivisible whole, and our races consolidated as strong as steel. You tell me where he's talking about breaking down of castes here. He's saying that we have to come together and go beyond, transcend the ideas that are causing impediment to Hindu unity. I hope I'm making sense here, Anshuman.
No,
Right?
absolutely. And this is also a reason why he was targeted from those the traditionalists of that time,
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
he is against caste, but this was not so. He was against
Not so.
discrimination, and he
During the
acknowledged the
during the
yes,
Patit Pawan movement, he got a lot of flack and lot of opposition from the traditional Brahmins of Ratnagiri. I
of
should say this
Ratnagiri
also.
itself. Yes,
And that
exactly.
is okay, that is accepted, and we do understand that these social hierarchies and segregations are in place, those fault lines are there, but one has to understand when he talks about Hindu blood and that ancient Hindu blood flowing, creating a common absolute Hindu identity, he's talking of building that. So it is not you go about destroying structures, it is about you building new unified Hindu people or citizens. That is the idea. You're saying something, Anshuman. Yeah, please, please.
Exactly. Just on the point of common blood, I remembered a song which is a nationalist song. It has a line, "रगों में तेरे बह रहा है खून राम श्याम का, जगत गुरु
हाँ,
गोविंद और छत्रपति शिव का."
अच्छा, हाँ,
So it transcends what has been created as different religions. Sikh and of course Chhatrapati Shivaji was the
हम्म,
staunch
हम्म,
Hindu, and Ram
हम्म,
and Sham are the Ram and Sham.
हम्म,
But this was the ideal which was driving Savarkar. We see when people utilize his ideas to say caste must go. I remember a very great example that once a gentleman from the Mahar community tried to test Savarkar,
yeah,
saying, "Will you drink water from my hand?" Savarkar readily drank it, and then he said, "Will you drink water from this gentleman's hand from
हम्म,
who is from the Chamar community?"
हम्म,
So that gentleman from Mahar community was taken aback. But then he expounded on that caste is not a Brahmin construct, or it is not just a Savarna
no,
construct.
no,
It has ossified in our society due to certain reasons, and every caste is equally to blame for it. That is why that focus on interdining, that is why that focus on intermarriage. A specific point to note on intermarriage, since since it came out in our discussion, was that Savarkar was fully in favor of the community's protection of people who marry out of love or
yeah,
any other, mainly out of love, who may be of different jatis, so to say. High or low, it doesn't matter. If they are in love, they can freely marry without being molested or without being harmed in any way. But to extrapolate that in today's sense and to say that the state must incentivize intercaste marriages and it must incentivize that in order to break down some so called jati and to eradicate its existence, not the existence of the jatis which are under the purview of reservations, but the
yeah,
existence of one certain jati, that is diabolical to say the least.
yeah.
And
I,
that
I
won't
to that. On the
Savarkar.
point of you gave that anecdote, right? First of all, in 1930, I remember he organized a sahabhojan, a community feast, highlight a community feast. Drinking water can be let aside. Community feast where
Of course.
everyone, matlab, you had Brahmins, you had Chambhar, Mahar, everyone. Matlab, I don't want to go into the details of castes that are mentioned, but they sat down and ate together. So he said that people who many a times even ignore shadows of other people should bring about this revolution of Hindu unity and should sit and eat together. His wife, Mai, who is known as Mai, she did. There is a thing in Maharashtrian culture, haldi kumku we call it. Haldi is haldi, kumkum is kumkum. But it's a program during Sankranti that women come together. So she organized haldi kumku programs also, where women from different communities came together. So the idea again and again, I am insisting, it is not this very fiendish idea of going and finding faults in the caste structure. He was not bothered by that. He was bothered by a bigger crisis of lack of Hindu unity. Going back to the document, if I can take a minute of Hindutva, what he
Sure,
wrote,
sure,
why,
certainly.
why, why do you think the genesis of that document happens? When he is in, he was given life imprisonment twice. So
Mm.
he mockingly said that the British government does believe in the idea of reincarnation, because once I'll die, I'll
Mm.
come back again, and again I would be. So in his book Maji Janmathe, or My Life Transportation is the translation. Rather, the book original work is Maji Janmathe. Janmathe is life transportation. He writes all these things. But the point is that when he is in jail, and Khilafat movement was at its peak. That idea of the Turkish Empire being defeated by the British during the war, and the position of Khalif, or he's the you might be the better person to explain that structure, but that being disbanded. This is the whole basic idea here, right? Okay. And then Gandhi comes up with the idea that for Hindu Muslim unity we should support the Khilafat movement. And when he meets people in jail, and rather I would be very blunt, as I'm always, and the disillusioned Congress workers, and he says that, oh, we are part of Khilafat movement because eventually we need to support them. It is our duty as Hindus to support our Muslim brethren. No harm in that, but are Muslim brethren fighting with you for emancipation and independence of your nation? No, they're fighting with you because they support the idea of Khilafat. And in an anecdotal way I'm saying this, and I think in the older movie, not the Randeep Huda's
Mm.
version of Swatantra Veer Savarkar, but the older version, there is a very beautiful movie which was produced and created by Sudhir Phadke, who was one of the greatest music directors in Marathi industry, and it is a beautiful movie. I would urge the younger audiences, you can watch and go see Randeep Huda ji's work also. I'm not against it. It's a fairly a good piece of production. But the older version of Swatantra Veer Savarkar's life that Sudhir Phadke ji has created, it's really which will touch your heart. And in that there is a scene, I would rather go into the scene where he asks that whom are you fighting for? They said we are fighting for our mazhab, Islam, and the position of Khalifa. And would you take up arms? They say yes, we would take up arms. Looking at this, he understands the disillusionment and the travesty of not understanding who we are. He's referring to us, the Hinduness, right? The absence of Hinduness. And that is the reason he so profoundly and with urgency wrote the document of Hindutva. And you can see that manifesting into the Mopla riots. I need not talk about it because it wrenches my heart what happened to Hindus in Mopla in the name of Khilafat. If you can
Exactly.
also talk about that a bit, this whole.
We
Uh, uh,
will, and since we are coming to the concluding part of this
yeah,
brief
yeah.
session, and Savarkar's life is so vast and so
Hmm.
full of learnings for us that it will require more than one conversation,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah, yeah.
But coming
True.
to the most critical aspect for which Savarkar needs to be studied thoroughly is his acute sense of Shatrubodha, or the
Yeah,
sense of the other, as we call it. Savarkar was no lily-livered politician. He never fought for any political seat, and he never compromised on his views. So he was very particular on the threat that Hindudom faces from the two crusading religions, namely
yeah,
Islam and Christianity. And I remember another anecdote where he speaks with one of the Ali brothers. This is when he was fully into the movement of Ghar Wapsi and
yeah.
fully spreading the
Shuddhikaran
word
also.
of salvation.
Yeah,
Yes,
Shuddhikaran
Shuddhikaran
also.
and Ghar Wapsi.
Yeah,
So he speaks with him and he says, Ki, since if somebody has kept his door open, the thief cannot come and say that I have been stealing for so long. Why did you close your door now? This is against my rights. That is
hmm.
not tolerable. If you convert people to your faith, we are well within our rights to reconvert them and bring them back to the Hindu fold.
Back to.
So he was staunchly in favor of Ghar Wapsi, and he had an acute sense of Shatrubodha in the sense that he knew that the text of Islam and his writings copiously demonstrate that the text of Islam urges the Muslims to retaliate against any sense of nationhood which is not part of
Yeah,
Ummah.
yeah,
and any communal bonhomie with other communities beyond that of Islamic kith and kin, a fact which Dr. Ambedkar also recognized. And he commended Savarkar's proposition when asked with what is the alternative to Pakistan. Because when he was
Hmm.
writing the book Pakistan or the Partition of India, he comments Savarkar's idea in that, saying his proposition is very clear, it's logical. We will not divide our nation. You live with one man, one vote in a democratic setup. You don't try to
Yeah.
increase your numbers. We won't try to increase ours, and we will operate as majority. You will operate as minority without any of us infringing on others' rights, which is what should be the actual working definition of democracy. We see that
Yeah.
that didn't play out, but that was Savarkar at his clearest, at his most logical, proposing this is how this can be solved. Unfortunately, we never saw that proposition come to light. But this doesn't detract from the fact that he had a clear sense of Shatrubodha and the Hindu unity, the one you mentioned, which has to be forged like steel. It was in response to this, because Savarkar is very famous for saying as this as well, that a Hindu is most Hindu when he ceases to be so. What does that mean? We know that when the yogic truths are realized, or when
Yeah.
any of the paths reach their culmination, there is no sense of I left. So, uh, if any listener is curious, if there is no sense of I left, then how can there be swayaṃbodha or shatrubodha? You don't have any sense of I.
Right.
So, based on that, your community, it doesn't happen at a community level, it happens at an individual level. To protect your community, that is why the whole concept of Hindutvam, and that is why the whole concept of Hindutva as well, which is why that word is so uh, brutally disliked by
Yeah.
people on the other side, people who don't like to
It is
see
a.
this tradition.
I feel if I can,
Sure, sure.
this whole idea of a spiritual cultural identity. Hindutva is, many people would say, oh, it's a political idea. It is,
It's
no doubt about it. It is a political idea, but it is deeply ingrained or imbibed with spiritual and cultural aspects. Because if you read the document you have, and many people would, I would urge them, it goes back to the Vedic period, right? Where he traces the idea of what we are, who is a Hindu, what is in the name, all these chapters that are there. It comes from that spiritual cultural context or structure that he builds this whole idea. And I think the document of Hindutva is in a way it can be called a master reckoner on Swayambodh and Shatrubodh. Because as I just told you, the story or the anecdotal thing that I just mentioned, that he wrote it with a realization that he understood that we don't understand as a community, as a society, that who we are. That is the whole idea of Swayambodh, right? And I think
exactly.
also you mentioned Hindutva, but also the six glorious epochs of Indian history
Mhm.
is a text written by him where he talks about the Muslim invasions and the whole idea of we falling weak. The moment the internal structures fall weak, the external enemy is always there. And internal structures, why they fall weak? Because we forget who we are. It's a simple idea that has been professed. So that Swayambodh and Shatrubodh was very much prominent, and I think if you look at, he's one of the earliest father figures of this idea that you should have a strong Shatrubodh and understand what the other is doing. This also goes. I will give you a historical arc also, because then it would kind of, because we are at the concluding part. Militarization of Hindu youth. I think there is no bigger insight, or what you call as a kranti drashtana, who understands the future, political future, and the socio-economic future of Hindu society. He said that with burgeoning numbers of Muslims in Indian army, or in the British army that point in time, we have to militarize Hindu youth. Dr. Munje, one of his very close associates, and later on it goes on, and I see there is a next generation, Dr. Hedgewar, and founding of RSS, which also Swatantradev Savarkar was very crucial part of that process. Dr. Munje actively worked towards militarization of Hindu youth and seeing to it that Hindu youth join Indian military. And as I said, Hindutva is Rashtriyatva. So a Hindu is a nationalist, and a nationalist is always a Hindu. That should be very, very clearly understood. And he said that is very, very crucial, because then who is protecting you? And that larger community who is protecting you is not from this Punyabhu and Pitrubhu. And when the time comes, you can understand
He will side
what
with the invaders. Hmm.
yeah, they will side with the invaders. And
And it is
misery,
not to say
yeah,
he was castigating the entire community, but he had
yeah,
a clear understanding of the ideology and where it is flowing from.
very true,
He
very
also
true.
suggested
So he,
many solutions for that, and I think it will take another conversation for us to delve into
yeah,
it.
yeah,
But just to conclude this point of Shatrubodha, he was very critical that the Shatru must be understood, and Hindus must not destroy their own unity in supporting somebody who is a Shatru, not
hmm,
necessarily one who claims to follow that ideology, but who is a Shatru, who has antagonism towards this land and its culture.
yeah,
So, because
yeah,
we see currently that there is a great deal of Brahmanophobia,
hmm,
whereas the other sides are appeased and given doles one after the other. So that shouldn't be there, and
yeah.
that can never be construed as Savarkar's thought. It can never be said that this has been borrowed from his thought. That was the entire
Never
premise of
even
Shakti.
directly see him talking or subscribing that okay, this he said that there is a class of people who is responsible for whatever caste atrocities are happening, not particularly saying that only Brahmins are. I can assure you there is nothing like that written in any of the literature in that sense. He does criticize for superstitious behavior amongst all castes. So he was actually a very free speech exponent, what you call a free speech absolutist in these days, na, in this. So he criticized everyone and anyone for their foolishness. Not that he was targeting any particular community. In a on a lighter note, maybe I can say. And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So, Shushanji, it was a great pleasure to have you on Bodha. Let's continue this conversation and let's continue because we touched upon many ideas. The idea of nationhood, Hindutva as
yeah.
nationhood, the idea of Shatrubodha and svayaṃbodha, which Savarkar had. Let us continue on that topic and we will meet again and speak on it on a later date.
Yes.
And
Thank
thank
you.
you everyone all for listening. We'll meet again.
Thank
Jai
you,
Hind.
Anshuman. Bharat Mata ki jai.